The awakening, a legacy stolen. The crunch of gravel beneath my tires felt wrong. It was a sound I had heard 1,000 times before, but today it carried an unfamiliar weight, an eerie dissonance that set my nerves on edge. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as my SUV rounded the last bend of Maple Ridge Road. And then I saw it. Where golden wheat fields once stretched under the morning sun, now stood a towering concrete structure. A hotel gleaming with polished windows that reflected the sky like 1,000 soulless eyes. The sight struck me like a punch to the gut. My family's land that had been in our name for 4 generations, was gone. Stolen. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering against my ribs as I stared at the monstrosity that had replaced my childhood memories. The rustic beauty of our farm, the hard work of my ancestors, had been erased in a matter of weeks. It was as if someone had taken an eraser to history itself, replacing it with something cold, corporate, and soulless. But how? I had only been gone for a month, a crucial consulting job in Singapore that my family desperately needed. My wife Sarah and I had prepared meticulously before I left, ensuring everything was secured. So how had this happened? A construction worker nearby noticed my presence. He hesitated before approaching, clipboard in hand. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice polite but uncertain. I stepped out of the car, my boots pressing into soil that no longer felt like mine. "This is my family's land," I said, my tone calm, measured. "I'm Richard Holloway." The worker stiffened slightly. He recognized the name. "Oh, you're the owner." His eyes darted toward the massive structure behind him, then back at me. There was hesitation in his voice now, uncertainty. Before I could ask another question, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Richard, emergency. Call me ASAP." I didn't call, not yet. My gaze locked onto a sign posted near the construction entrance. Willowbrook Community Development, approved by HOA Board. And below it, a name I knew all too well. Karen Reynolds, Project Director. My stomach dropped. Karen, the HOA president who had made it her life's mission to push us off this land. The woman who had sent endless violation notices about our fence height, grass length, and unsightly farming equipment. A petty dictator who had long viewed our farm as an eyesore in her perfect, cookie-cutter suburban community. She had finally done it. But this was beyond petty HOA fines. This was theft. I walked toward a stack of documents laid out on a table near the site office. Permits, blueprints, zoning approvals. My fingers traced over the official stamps, the signatures, the bureaucratic nonsense that had paved the way for this betrayal. Then I saw it. A small legal clause buried in dense legal jargon. Something about community improvement zones. My gut twisted. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was planned. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be robbed in broad daylight. I turned on my heels and marched back to my car. I wasn't just going to call Sarah. I was going to fight back. Setting the stage, a battle begins. Driving back into town, my mind raced. How long had this been in the works? How had Karen managed to pull this off? And most importantly, how could I prove this was illegal? I stopped at a local coffee shop, needing a place to think. The air smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries, but I barely noticed. I sat down, pulled out my notebook, and started making a list. Find out how the HOA got legal approval. Check county records for zoning changes. Talk to neighbors. Did anyone else know about this? Dig through my grandfather's old property records. My hands moved with purpose, scribbling down every possible loophole I could exploit, every question I needed answered. I had spent years working with corporations on complex legal issues. If Karen thought I was just going to roll over, she was in for a nasty surprise. A waitress came by, refilling my coffee. "Rough day?" she asked, giving me a sympathetic smile. I exhaled sharply, looking up from my notes. "Not yet," I said. "But it's about to get interesting." And Karen had no idea what was coming. The unraveling, digging up the past. The forgotten documents. Back at home, I tore through the attic, searching for something I hadn't needed in years, my grandfather's land records. He had been meticulous about keeping every deed, every zoning paper, and every legal agreement related to our farm. Dust danced in the slanted sunlight as I yanked open an old wooden filing cabinet, its brass handles worn from decades of use. Inside, neatly stacked folders bore my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. It didn't take long before I found what I was looking for. 1952 property deed, the Holloway family farm. My heart pounded as I flipped through the yellowed pages. And there it was. A handwritten clause buried in the fine print. This land held in perpetual trust shall remain agricultural unless transferred with the explicit consent of the Holloway family. I let out a slow breath. Karen had built a hotel on land that legally couldn't be developed. I snapped a quick picture and sent it to Marcus, my lawyer. I think I just found the key to everything. Marcus, if this is real, they're in deep trouble. Meet me first thing tomorrow. Karen's surveillance game. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch processing what I had just uncovered, headlights flashed down the gravel road. A familiar white SUV, HOA stickers plastered on the bumper. Karen. She parked near the property line, clipboard in hand, surveying the land like a queen inspecting her domain. I stayed in the shadows, watching. Why was she here now? She must have sensed something shifting. She was checking for weaknesses, seeing if I was going to push back. My phone buzzed. Another message from Marcus. Marcus, I found something too. Call me ASAP. I took one last look at Karen, her expensive heels sinking into the soil that didn't belong to her. She had no idea that she was about to walk straight into my legal trap. A web of corruption. The next morning, I met Marcus at his office. The moment I stepped inside, he pushed a thick folder across the table. You're going to love this, he said. Inside were copies of zoning requests, HOA meeting minutes, and suspicious property transfers. Karen had been quietly rezoning small parcels of community land over the years, piece by piece, manipulating records so that she could claim ownership of abandoned properties. But my farm? That was different. She faked a vote, Marcus said. The HOA board never approved this project the right way. She used technicalities and legal loopholes to make it look official. But the signatures? Half of them don't match up. It's fraud. I grinned. We've got her. Laying the trap. With evidence in hand, it was time to make my move. That night, I drafted a formal legal notice challenging the development's legitimacy. I sent copies to the county zoning office, the state environmental agency. A local journalist I knew was hungry for a story. The next morning, I made one final call to the HOA itself. Karen, I said, keeping my voice calm, we need to talk. She hesitated. About what? I'm challenging the hotel's development. And I've already sent the paperwork. Silence. Then, an icy chuckle. You're making a mistake. No, I said. You did. And with that, I hung up. I had set the trap. Now, all I had to do was wait. The reckoning justice served. The wheels were in motion, and Karen had no idea that her empire was about to collapse. For years, she had ruled the HOA like a dictator, manipulating rules, threatening homeowners, and bending laws to suit her vision of the community. But this time, she picked the wrong opponent. The first cracks appear. Less than 24 hours after I sent my legal challenge, things started falling apart for Karen. The county zoning office responded first. Their email was short but explosive. Upon review of the zoning approvals for Willowbrook Hotel, we have identified procedural inconsistencies. A formal investigation is now underway. I smirked. That was only the beginning. Then came the state environmental agency. Apparently, the wetland area near my farm, which Karen had so carelessly ignored, was a protected zone. The construction company was now under immediate review for potential environmental violations. I could only imagine Karen's face when she got those emails. The HOA board turns on Karen. That night, the HOA held an emergency meeting. I arrived early, taking my usual seat at the back. But this time, people weren't ignoring me. Neighbors who had once feared Karen's wrath now whispered among themselves, casting nervous glances at the board members. Karen sat at the head of the table, her usual confidence strained but intact. This meeting is to address the baseless accusations made against the HOA and our recent development project. She began, her voice cold. I leaned back in my chair. This was going to be fun. Martha Thompson, one of the longest-standing HOA members, stood up. Karen, she said. Why weren't we informed that the zoning approval was falsified? Karen stiffened. That's ridiculous. The approval was perfectly legal. Marcus, my lawyer, chose that moment to walk in. Actually, he said, dropping a thick folder onto the table, it wasn't. The board members gasped as Marcus began reading Karen's emails, the ones where she had pressured local officials to approve the project without proper votes. Karen's face turned as pale as a ghost. Where did you get those? She hissed. Let's just say, I replied. Not everyone in this room is on your side anymore. That's when Justin, the youngest board member, stood up. I have something to say. His voice was shaking. Karen told us this project was for the community. But I saw the contracts. Silence. Karen froze. She's making a profit off of this, he continued. The hotel isn't owned by the HOA. It's owned by Karen's private LLC. Gasps rippled through the room. I already knew this, of course. But hearing it come from one of her own board members? That was priceless. Karen slammed her hand on the table. That's a lie, she shouted. I smiled. We'll see what the judge thinks. The courtroom showdown. 2 weeks later, we met in county court. Karen, flanked by her high-priced lawyer, still held onto the delusion that she could bully her way out of this. But the moment Marcus presented the evidence, the courtroom shifted against her. The forged HOA vote approvals, the environmental violations, the emails proving her personal financial gain. Karen's lawyer tried every trick in the book, but Judge Reynolds wasn't buying it. This is an egregious abuse of power, the judge finally declared. Not only is the development null and void, but the plaintiff has the right to reclaim his land in its original condition. I had won. And Karen? She was personally fined for fraud, banned from serving on any HOA board, and faced a class action lawsuit from homeowners she had scammed over the years. But the best part? She was forced to pay for the demolition of the hotel herself. The aftermath, a community reborn. The day the demolition crews arrived, I stood where my grandfather's wheat fields once swayed. Neighbors gathered, watching in stunned silence as the bulldozers tore down the very structure Karen had built on stolen land. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Not a bad ending, huh? I smiled. No, it wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. That night, I walked my land. My land. The soil was still healing, but it was mine again. Sarah joined me, wrapping her arms around my waist. We did it, she whispered. I looked toward the distant horizon, where the last remnants of the hotel lay in ruins. Karen was gone. The HOA was under new leadership. And the community, it had finally broken free from her grip. And the best part? We were stronger than ever. Fire final message. Stand up for what's yours, fire. This wasn't just a story about me. This was about every homeowner who has ever been bullied by an HOA, every family who has ever fought against corrupt officials. If you've ever felt powerless, remember, pushpin knowledge is power. Pushpin the law is on your side, if you know how to use it. Pushpin bullies only win when no one fights back. Backhand index pointing right if you love the story. Hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life justice stories, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Justice isn't given, it's taken. And today we took it back.